Hi, everyone. Welcome. It's been a month, believe it or not. You have also found BrisJS for the sorry, technical difficulties. You have found BrisJS for the month of April. Yes, we are here, and we're streaming to you live with plenty of speakers waiting in the wings. I am going to just make my face bigger. There we go. Hopefully you can see us here now. There's a little bit of a delay on the stream as usual, folks. So if you aren't getting a quick answer to your question, we will see it in a matter of probably 10 to 15 seconds. Yeah, thanks everyone for joining us. We can see the numbers are steadily rising now. Thanks very much. We'll go through the usual preamble and then we'll get you straight into hearing from our speakers. We're really happy to have them here with us today. So let's take it away. Let's reshare. All good. All right, everyone. So if you're not aware, we tend to use Slido to be able to give kind of a consolidated way to ask our speakers some questions. At the end of their presentation, I tend to collate everyone's questions and do a bit of an interview or fireside chat, however you want to sort of term that in either meetup or kind of conference terms. Yeah, we give you the opportunity to ask some questions and follow up with anything that you either want more info on or you want to get some of the technical nitty gritty out of. Definitely take advantage of this. They're here now, and you can ask them straight away as part of the amazing opportunity of having them on live stream. We've also got the YouTube chat, which obviously we're streaming to YouTube, and this will be available on the YouTube recording and live feedback as well. If you're on the chat, say hi. It's always nice to get a wave and say hello there as well. Like I said, if you've got any of those questions, we'll direct them to the Slido. If for some reason you can't access that because you've got one device, you're on the go or something like that, I'll try and take those and ferry them over to Slido as well, so that we can get them all in one list and then rally them off. We'll have our speakers here till the end. So if, for example, you came in late and you're watching it on replay, you can still log that question. And what will happen is we'll try and circle back with any dangling questions for any specific speakers. Do tag in who you're after, who you're going to direct the question to. That'll really help. Yeah, absolutely. We'll get cracking into it. Okay, we'd like to start off with our acknowledgement of country. So while we are all distributed, it's really important to be able to acknowledge traditional owners location by location. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the traditional owners of the site which we broadcast from today, which are the Yugara and Bundjalung people. And I'd also like to pay my respects to elders past and present. Meetup is where we've been broadcasting some of the changes and as well as the final event listing. I'm sure folks who are very used to this rodeo have been checking our GitHub pages to see who's coming up and who's confirmed. We'll talk about that in just a second. Well, what we want from the meetup is if you go and actually subscribe to it, you'll get all the notifications of changes as well as the email outs, and you'll get to know exactly when we're on and if we have any reschedules or anything like that. So it is still very valuable, and kind of gives us an indication of how many folks we're going to have on the live stream too. Code of conduct. We're dedicated to having a harassment-free experience. This includes online. We're in a virtual environment, so to speak. So it's still important. So please go and make sure that you abide by the code of conduct. It's available on that link there, brisjs.org conduct. And I always like to harp on about this one, probably a bit too much. Please submit talks. you are the lifeblood of BrisJS. So absolutely reliant on everyone who comes in and submits a talk for BrisJS. So we're very, very keen to see your submissions come through and make sure that we can go and work you into the schedule. If for some reason conflicts come up or you need a bit more time to prepare, that's all good. We just work you through into with tagging and confirmations and things like that. We try and build up a bit of a list. Having a buffer is awesome. Definitely reduces the weight off my shoulders, and also means that people can get an early look at who's lining up to talk. But yeah, if for some reason you've got a burning topic that you don't feel qualified to talk about, or I mean qualified, you don't, you know, you don't have a presentation ready or anything like that, but you'd love to hear somebody else talk about. There's some folks out there that want to be able to give talks at BrisJS, but I'm really not sure what folks would be interested in. So we also have the option where you can request a talk. You can leave those things on our GitHub and we tag it appropriately, and they'll appear on the brisjs.org site, as well as potential topics for somebody to pick up and have a look at. This is what that kind of looks like. It's a bit of an old screenshot, but the pattern remains identical. The idea is you pop up a GitHub issue and we tag it with about the approximate length and whether or not it's coming up in the next or future, and whether or not it's been volunteered or if it's a talk request, as I just mentioned before. We're on a bunch of the different socials, but we're most active on Twitter. The Facebook really kind of also exists there for Messenger as well, so that you can get feedback or ask any questions there too. But YouTube's where it's at with our live streaming. There's also BrisJS.org, which is kind of a placeholder at the moment that rallies you to these different links, gives a little bit of information around presenting, like I mentioned, also some of those topics that you might be interested in looking at. Yeah, it's got another important feature, which is the BrisJS job board, which again, you can use GitHub to submit a job posting. So if you're looking for additional colleagues and you know your company is hiring, you could go and forward on any job postings that you think are worthwhile here. So that way you can get in and you'll see it just sort of, if it gets tagged correctly by us in GitHub, it will automatically appear on the job board page on brisjs.org. Yes, and we are sponsored in these remote times. Zoom is being sponsored by the company that I work for, which is PCCW Global. We're still looking for a bunch of different people across a number of different disciplines, especially in the systems, SRE, JS, of different levels, varieties. So there's a bunch of different things out there. Do get in touch with me if you're interested in any of that, any of those positions. There's also a Git.io link there with, I think that goes and redirects you to the, I want to say LinkedIn page that we've got set up. But the job cycling there is very, very quick. So to be able to get in and make sure that I can forward you through, just get in contact with me, no problem there at all. Okay, no more further preamble. So tonight, if you're not already aware, you're going to be hearing from Phil talking about WebOTP, which is a great way to authenticate who you are, or at least provide some authorization from the browser. We'll mix it up from the order that I posted before. We've got a lightning talk that jumps in between there, a little 10-minute break that will come in from Ashley Davis about how to turn any web page into a desktop application in 5 minutes. So if you've got this niggly thing that you just don't want to keep in a tab, but you'd love it to be on your desktop, there it is. So we'll hear about that soon. There's also a really cool talk about high performance SQL coming through from James. And then we'll close off with a 15-minute talk. So this is one that we missed out on due to Andre's ill health. So hopefully we'll be able to get this one through about an OpenTelemetry simulator in Node.js. Yeah, absolutely. We'll then finish off with some polls, and we'll have plenty of Q&A after each speaker there as well. So looking forward to hearing from all our speakers. Now I'm going to invite Phil. I will just end my show and stop sharing. I have done this before, I swear. Phil, how you doing?
I am good, thank you, Kevin. Very good. Thank you for having me.
It's a pleasure.
Let me get my screen up whilst thinking about that as well. Makes sense. There we go.
Excellent. You can see that perfectly. Take it away.
All right. Thank you very much. Get all the Zoom windows out of the way. All right. Yeah. Good evening, BrisJS. I guess technically this is my first time at BrisJS, although not physically at, but hopefully that's something we can do at some point in the future. My name's Sonash. I am a developer evangelist for Twilio. Twilio, if you don't know, is a communications platform. So it's a whole bunch of APIs that you can use in your applications to do things like send and receive text messages or emails, or make and receive phone calls, or set up video chats, or do two-factor authentication, or basically anything that involves like a phone or communicating with somebody online. Like we have an API to help you do that with your app. I'm coming to you from Melbourne today, but like I said, I'd love to visit at some point as well. BrisJS, it seems like a nice place, nice set of people there. So do give us a wave out. I'm also watching the YouTube chat. If you see me glance off to my right over there, that's because I'm seeing if anyone's waving, because I like it when people chat during talks as well. Almost accidentally, I think, due to the I know the lag between the video and the thing here. Somebody just said hello, but that's not good. I should move on before I get caught up in temporal loops about who's doing what at what time. Anyway, cool. What I wanted to say, actually, do find me online. I'm Phil Nash all over the place, mainly on Twitter. Or if you ever have a question about what I'm talking about, or indeed Twilio, drop me an email at Twilio, philnash@twilio.com. I'll be right there. But let's talk about, I want to talk about web APIs for better authentication experiences today. And by better authentication experiences, I kind of mean around the world of two-factor authentication experiences. You see, I sort of have a problem. I have two-factor authentication set up on a whole bunch of things. I don't trust passwords; they're a horrible thing. But I end up getting messages like this all the time to log into my app. Or whatever app I'm trying to log into at the time. And maybe I'm easily distracted. Maybe this is just a me problem, but maybe this has happened to you as well, in that I try to log into a thing. I then get the text message. I look at my text message app on my phone. I then, scroll to maybe a different app on my phone. I end up scrolling through Twitter. I end up looking at my emails on my phone, even if I was originally on my desktop anyway, possibly even in my email application. But basically, I get just distracted by this alternate. I need a different app and different device in order to log into something, and it just doesn't work that well for me, which is a shame. It's a horrific amount of friction that we put in the way of users when trying to log in. I like to rate this as a user experience poop emoji. That's about how I feel, which is a real shame because it's incredibly important. And I always have to, when talking about two-factor authentication, I have to talk about why it's important. And the first reason is, well, we have to understand why two-factor authentication is important. And the first reason is in this pie chart. And I normally hate using pie charts in slides, but this one was just important. It was a poll taken by Google back in right at the end of December 2018. It said, "How often do you reuse passwords?" And I hope everyone watching right now is like in the yellow section of the chart there with the not all of the time, the green section of the chart, none of the time, never reuse passwords, right? But 52% of people, that is 52%, I think. There's some weird hovering on this. 52% of the time, some people reused passwords some of the time. And indeed, in the yellow section here, I think it's 13%. There it is. Say they reuse passwords all of the time. 13% of people answering this particular thing said that they use basically one password for everything. Not use one password, the app, just one password. Very frustrating. Very much on side with the people never reusing passwords. But what I like about this is that 35% of people said they never reuse passwords. But that same poll asked how many people used a password manager in order to look after their passwords. And the answer to that was 24%. Now, this concerns me because either there's like 11 percentage points of people there, like a good chunk of that green slice, are either have a very elaborate post-it note system with all the passwords for their accounts written on them around their monitor, or perhaps they have incredibly good memories, or they could just be straight lying to the poll. I mean, it's just a survey. You can lie to surveys. It's not a problem. It's not illegal. But 24%, so like 76% of the world is not using a password manager, according to this survey. And so password reuse is all over the place. That makes me sad. And thus, what we do as developers is try and protect people by making sure they have strong passwords, right? Perhaps, your password must contain at least 8 letters, a capital, a plot, a protagonist with good character development, a twist, and a happy ending. Or something similar to that. We might find we're making up rules, or we're following other people's rules to make a password a bit more secure and hopefully different to other applications. And all of this just ends up with people fitting into those rules more and more straightforward, in more and more predictable ways. And so when you have your rules that say every password must contain a capital letter and a number and a lowercase letter and a special character, you find that people choose their favorite dictionary word. They start it with a capital letter. They finish up with a 1, because 1 is the best number, and then an exclamation point, because that's the same key as the 1. So that makes it easy too. And this just provides patterns for people to break into accounts and make it easier to break passwords. And not only are passwords easier to break, but there are people just leaking passwords all over the place. If you don't already know Troy Hunt's HaveIBeenPwned.com, then you should. You should go put your email address into there or your phone number and find out how many sites have let your passwords just let them out into public. I am a kind of person who was previously guilty of using a few passwords. So I was in the reuse some of the time section of that pie chart at the start. And then a whole bunch of my passwords got leaked. I found them on Have I Been Pwned. I lost access to accounts. I got access to those accounts back, thankfully. And this is what caused me to learn about a whole lot of this, just trying to keep myself safe. And ultimately, the answer to this becomes two-factor authentication. It means we'd no longer have to rely on just a person not reusing their password, or not having their password leaked by some other account, or not following some set of rules that make their password easier to guess than it would have been without those rules. We have two-factor authentication. Two-factor authentication so that a person needs both a password and then something that they own, either a device or a token or a phone number. If you're talking about something like SMS, two-factor authentication. And funnily enough, SMS two-factor authentication, I think, is probably it's the least secure version of two-factor authentication, but it is still so many times better than just a password. And so that's where we are. We have a world in which two-factor authentication pretty much has to exist in order to keep most accounts safe, because people and passwords don't mix well. But we come back to the original problem, that the user experience of two-factor authentication is friction. The user experience of two-factor authentication gets in users' ways. And if you've ever looked at any studies of things like performance on the web, then you would have heard things like, multiple kind of shops and other places have published results about how increasing the performance, decreasing the performance, making a website slower will lead to less conversion. Users using their site less, even by like 1/10 of a second, they'll lose percentages of their users. And that's just about performance, and weirdly enough, about tiny amounts. And so performance is really an amount of user friction. But then we have security, which is it's more of a like brick wall in the way rather than just like friction moving people slowly, which is sad. And so increasing or decreasing the friction in security experiences is something that I want to see more of. And that is why I was sort of excited when a few bits of the web platform have kind of come together to try and make two-factor authentication a smoother and nicer experience. And that's what I want to show you as part of the talk this evening. And it starts with a really simple thing. It's almost shouldn't be allowed at the BrisJS meetup because this is just straight HTML. The input element is one of my favorite elements in HTML because of how versatile it is, how changing a single attribute can change the look, feel, and behavior of an element completely, of just the input element. It's pretty much the only one that is so wildly different based on such tiny configuration changes. It makes it fun to work with. It makes it impossible to style at times, but it also gives it a lot of power. And so my favorite thing that I learned about in the last couple of years is the autocomplete attribute on the input element. And I'm going to show it in context of just this two-factor authentication thing, but it has a lot more to it as well. So if you have an input element and it's a type of text and you have a name and ID there, adding the autocomplete attribute, calling it one-time code, will make life better for your Safari users, specifically Safari and iOS, although I'll come back to that later. Autocomplete one-time code does a very simple thing. It allows Safari to talk to its underlying operating system, iOS mostly, and say, hey, if you get a one-time code looking thing, I'm going to take it and offer it up to use to people. And so I have a little recording of that happening just in an example app I've worked on. It sort of happens quickly, so I'll end up having to pause or go back because that's how kind of nice an experience it is. It just goes. You might have seen this if you have an iOS device, but that's the code thing. And it went. That's what I mean. It's just quick. I genuinely could have done a better job of recording this video, but about there we go. So what happens is this input element has the autocomplete attribute one-time code on, and the phone received the text message, in this case for two-factor authentication, and it put it in that autocomplete box at the top of the keyboard. Oops, there it is. Put it in the autocomplete box at the top of the keyboard. And so you just press that auto submits the form, and you're through. Like I said, I entered this and kind of, it happened so quickly when I did it that it was done and we're logged in. Very excited about the whole thing. Just one little attribute makes that difference, and I love it. As I said, autocomplete has other uses. So this is particularly in terms of logins or user registration, that kind of thing. We can autocomplete for username and email, and that's particularly useful if you happen to have both of them, and you need to allow the browser to understand which one is for which. There's also password autocomplete. So there's new password and current password. Now, new password is great to let the browser know that you are, not just browsers actually, but of course, password managers can read this kind of thing as well. And let the browser know that this input element needs a new password in it. And in Firefox, for example, if you put new password as the autocomplete value, Firefox will suggest a securely generated password. In this case, LDQZSL-LTHVFIVBN2, which I now recommend you don't use as a password because it's been breached publicly online. But that's great. And then when it comes to, we have this new password and current password thing, and that's really useful if you're doing a password update flow, in which you want to have the person input their current password and then their new password and then confirm their new password. And so if all of them were treated the same, your password manager, your browser might end up just filling in all three with the same attribute, with the same password, which is useless. Really, you want to be able to fill in the current password with the current password and then generate a password into the new ones, into the new password one. And so that autocomplete attribute helps us out right there. I think it's great. There's a couple of other things around this that we can do to make the user experience better. One of them is if that input element was built with the code I used earlier, with just an ID, a name, a type, and the autocomplete attribute, then entering it we'll end up with our text keyboard here, which is not great when you're trying to enter 6 digits that are being sent to you. And you have to hit the number pad. And then even then, on this particular keyboard, you get the number pad with the numbers across the top and a whole bunch of other symbols. You don't need that. And so I like including the input mode of numeric to this. You might think turn this into a type of number, but technically a one-time password is not really a number. It's just it's a text string made out of numbers, made out of digits. And so the number keypad is also all sorts of wrong. Input mode numeric, though, that gets you the just get me numbers into this thing. And so if you don't have a device that is supporting autocomplete one-time code, then at least you can make it easier to input that code with the big numbers. iOS used to not support this particularly well. In fact, you used to have to trick it into showing this keyboard by using the pattern attribute with a regex of 6 digits. And really, you should never have to trick things into doing things with regex, because that's not a great way to live your life, I don't think. Instead, but now the input mode attribute is well supported on iOS, and input mode numeric just looks like this. So that, I mean, I've showed you all of this on a iOS device right now, and you might be wondering, does that work on the desktop? And the answer is sort of maybe, depends. The answer is kind of yeah, if you are fully invested in the Apple ecosystem. If you're using Safari desktop on the Mac, and you have messages hooked up to your account, and messages, your text messages appear in your desktop application, you can probably use this too. And it looks a bit like this. I'm not a Safari user, but I could get this working. Hold on, there it goes. I'm going to pause at the right time. We go to log in, the message gets sent, and boom, it appears there. You can fill that code in automatically there on the desktop. And I think that's very cool. I think it's very cool that that's able to, connect up like that. It does very much require you to be invested in that Apple ecosystem, though. It does work. It fills in the right code, and we move on. You also tell how bad I am at CSS. Look at the state of that logout button. Ugh. So let's move it on, because this is just Safari so far. It's great that it's a simple attribute, and adding an attribute to an element is just a very easy progressive enhancement to one's application. If that attribute is not supported, or it just doesn't work, or there's not a thing that can receive a text message, it's not going to make a difference to the experience. But if that is supported and it can improve the experience, then there we go. We now have a much smoother, it's not quite as smooth as just logging straight in with a username and password. There's still that interstitial step to hit, but it's a lot smoother than it was before. And you don't have to go off to the SMS app to go get the number and come back. It's just right there. So we need to talk about what other browsers are doing about it. And that is where we come to WebOTP. WebOTP is a relatively new proposal, certainly not near standard yet, but it's a bit of a proposal that allows us to do this in sort of any other browser, I guess. I think the fact that Safari and iOS and macOS can be so tied to the operating system that like a simple attribute on an element allows us to hook into something like this. I think in general for web applications, if we're going to do this for other browsers and other operating systems, or browsers on this operating system, then we need to be able to provide something that's a little bit more secure, but a little bit more kind of obvious, I guess. And so the WebOTP API, it actually, we need to start actually, before we get to the browser, before we get to any JavaScript, you actually have to do something slightly different with the message that you send. And this is a good security thing. As you can see beforehand, we just had this like top message with the number. Your verification code is 822373 in this case. And for WebOTP, you have to include this last line here, which has an @ symbol, and then the domain that you're sending to, the domain the person's logging in on, and then a hash, and then the code. And this, let's get out of the way. This, of course, means that we're adding security to the process. It means that you can't sort of clickjack or fish your way into a two-factor authentication or into an automated two-factor authentication flow, like the kind of thing we're building here, because the browser will refuse to input that code into any other site or any tab, any web app, browser tab that's open on any site that is not that domain that is notified in the message itself. So this is really cool. It's a bit of a phishing protection, and I think that's good. You have to remember to include that in your message. Maybe it looks a bit weird to users, but hopefully they don't have to see the message because it's going to move straight past them. And then once you've got that set up, you can then use this WebOTP API. Now, it's not really an API on its own. In fact, it very much relies on the credential management API, which is this navigator.credentials here. And navigator.credentials has a few methods. The important ones kind of really are get and store. Get in this case is used to retrieve things. But this credential management API is normally used for storing user credentials, so login things within the browser. So you can store a username and a password, and then you can get that username and password, enter it into your form and log a user in sort of seamlessly. It's a nice little thing, although I've not seen it much in action because I think it's maybe a weird thing for users to deal with. The idea that the browser and the website are collaborating to store their credentials, slightly strange. Navigator.credentials is also used as part of the WebAuthn flow. Web authentication being our kind of passwordless ability to log in and access things. And so in this case, in the case of WebAuthn, you'd use navigator.credentials get, and you'd pass in public key as your option. And there's a whole bunch of other options, and WebAuthn is a lot more complicated. But this WebOTP API adds another thing that you can get out of this navigator.credentials. In this case, you can see it's OTP. And in this case, you pass the option transport as SMS. Now that's an array there, but there's only one valid string you can pass in that array. So currently it's just SMS. But hopefully I'll talk about what we've got in the future, what I'd hope for in the future in a bit. Pass that in. That is going to pop permissions to the user to say, hey, is it okay to copy this thing out of this text message? And when they say, yes, it is, then this promise resolves and you have access to an OTP credential object, which has a code property, and you can use that to fill the form in, submit the form, move the user on. It is entirely the same process that we're trying to recreate in JavaScript that was previously an attribute on the input element. But like I said, I think this probably does require this for browsers that aren't necessarily just integrated to the operating system like Safari can be. So that's all the code you kind of need to know. There's obviously a bit more around it that you can do, but this is what it looks like. And again, I have to pause this because it was so quick. So I'm logging in here in Android, and there it is. Right. So we see at the top, we can see the text message came in, but at the bottom, this is our permissions dialog, and it says, "Do you want to allow Chrome to receive read the message, and get the code?" And of course you do. That's what you were doing. You were logging in, and so you press allow. And that gives that code over. We submit the form. It's job done. I like that. I like that a lot. I did want to say, if you do want to try this out yourself, I've put up just for now a very small test application that you can have a play around with and go see this in action yourself if you are using an Android or an iOS device. I've got a QR code actually on screen, even better. If you want to maybe hit that up, see it in action. Do make sure if you do hit this up, go to https://philnash.ngrok.io. HTTPS is important because the WebOTP API is only available on a secure domain. As many new kind of APIs in the web are these days. I can see one person's having a go, which is good. I won't steal your number. Your number is just going into a quick API call to Twilio, which is going to send that message off to you. And then and when it comes back, you should get the text message. You should be able to just hit whatever autocomplete thing is in there, and you'll get your own go at it. I'm trying to see if there's anybody got through to a verification yet. Things seem to be working. Posting to verifications. Yeah, that's a good sign. can't remember what happens after post to verification. It was 200 though, so that seems good. There's verification success. Somebody's got through. Excellent. And if you get through, you see you win a nice picture. I apologize for anybody who's getting a 404 when getting to verifications. Oh, what's happened there? This is not a great application. It's a very small demo, by the way. But yeah, hopefully you're seeing, if you're on iOS, you're seeing that autocomplete in the keyboard. If you are on Android, hopefully you are indeed seeing that other thing, the permissions dialog. Do let me know if you're seeing something wrong, as I apologize if it's not working. But yeah, thank you for trying that out. I'm excited, and I think if you do get all the way through the verification successfully, you get a picture of my dog. So that's something to win there, I guess, at the end. It's my little dog Ruby. She's a miniature dachshund, and she's adorable. She's also been out for a walk for most of this talk, so that kept her quiet for that as well. So I want to finish up. I think I've blasted through this fairly quickly, but I want to finish up by thinking a little bit about the future for this, because as I said, that code in the WebOTP API only talks about SMS right now. That's the only available transport. And I would really like to see this expand to other things. You see, sure, I work at Twilio and we send quite a lot of SMSs, and we're very happy about doing so. It keeps me employed, and I'm happy about that. But we also understand that SMS is not necessarily the most secure way to send one-time passwords. And in fact, I do actually use an authenticator app myself most of the time. And that's the app I have to open before I then get confused and go off and scroll through Twitter for 20 minutes instead of logging into the application I meant to. So I do think, but this is the beauty, I think, of web standards and well-produced web standard kind of proposals, in that this transport object opens this up to be used by other services. I'd very much like to see the transport here be like I guess authenticator app, or just app could be another transport, and that, you know, this provides then the browser to operating system side of things. But you can imagine that this actually would also require the sort of operating system to authenticator app side of things needing to be an interface between them, so that the operating system can say, hey, somebody else wants the one-time password for this application, this domain, whatever it is, and I don't think that exists right now. So it just doesn't happen. And then perhaps there could even be like some kind of over-the-air or nearby transport. I don't know. We need a transport for when you're on your desktop, but your authenticator app is on your phone, and you need to be able to trigger something there. I don't know how that would work at all. I can't even imagine it. But wow, wouldn't that be great? I'd love to just like click yes somewhere and get hold of that code. It'd be great. But doing an app and doing it on the same device certainly would make sense to me in terms of this API. So I'd like to see that. I'll be keeping an eye on the spec and on the proposal as it gets through. But this is something that you can use in your applications today. You can use both that autocomplete attribute. You can use WebOTP. I did include some discovery, what's the word? It's progressive enhancement anyway. The idea that this will only run if it can run, and that's really nice. And so we can add this to applications right now and enhance the experience of logging in, particularly with two-factor authentication. I also like the idea that, oh no, what was it? The last thing that I haven't covered yet is whether this works on the desktop as well. I've covered it's not going to work with authenticator apps, but can it work on the desktop? Apparently, I'm told, I've read that if you're using an Android device, I have an Android device I was testing this with, an Android device where you're logged into the Chrome app on Android and you're logged into your Chrome app on desktop, that it is entirely possible that making a request to the navigating credentials API here, using OTP as a transport, can fetch the code from your mobile device. However, I don't think I was dug in deep enough to the Android and Chrome ecosystem in order to make that work for myself. So whilst I got the Safari one working earlier, I was unable to make this happen. But again, if you put this code in place, and if you run in desktop Chrome, if you do run that line, if OTP credential in window, that will come back positive these days. And so it's an enhancement that might well make an experience, somebody logging into your app, have a great experience with it. This is sort of pain-free code. There's not even that much of it. And so it can make that experience a lot better. And maybe because it can make that experience better, we can encourage things like two-factor authentication in more places in order to keep our users more secure, stop them reusing their passwords, and stop them getting their accounts broken into, like I have on several occasions back when I was younger. I think that was a little quicker than I necessarily thought, but that is everything I've got for you this evening. It's been an absolute pleasure to come and talk to you, BrisJS. And as I said, my name is Phil Nash. I'm a developer evangelist at Twilio, and you can find me at all these places online. Thank you very much.
Thank you. That was wonderfully enlightening. And we've even got a few questions there as well. So hopefully we can go through that.
Exciting.
We'll start at the top. So we've got, I think one of them, one of them already has been answered, but maybe we could recover it for everyone else. What are the levels of browser or device support for the autocomplete one-time code?
Yeah, absolutely. So as far as I know, it's only supported and reads the code like that in Safari on iOS and Safari on the desktop. I don't know offhand what version numbers that arrived in, but it's been around for at least a couple of years now. I wrote a blog post about this like 2 years ago, and it was 6 months before that when I was like logging into something and hit that like autocomplete keyboard. And I went, wait, how do they do that? I was like, this is brilliant. And it was that simple. But it has been around.
Nice.
A link to can I use in Zoom? Yeah, that might work. I don't know if autocomplete necessarily comes up on that. Let me check. Autocomplete attributes. I mean, the autocomplete attribute itself is well supported for many things, but whether it will do that
would depend on the system passing it the codes.
Exactly. So but like I said, it's a painless thing to add, right? You can't ever rely on a thing like that, but it's absolutely painless. It's not going to cause you any trouble not doing that.
And then you can get the fallback happening as well.
Exactly.
That way you can move forward with life. It's always good for everyone. Yeah, cool. And this one, this is what I mentioned by haven't already been answered. They said I might have jumped in too quick, but is SMS the only thing OTP API works with?
It does indeed. It does for now. But hey, let's. I think we can make it work with more things. It just probably requires a bit of work on some operating system level. And then possibly the authenticator apps as well. But I'm absolutely sure that authenticator apps would be happy to support that kind of thing. We like at Twilio, we have an authenticator app called Authy. That's the one I like using. And we have no need to have you come and look at the Authy app if you can be using the code quickly and securely. So
exactly. Well, that ties in directly to the last question, so I'll just jump over that. It says, how does the WebOTP relate to the Twilio Verify API and Authy API for having it trigger a notification from the 2FA app? I'm assuming nothing.
It doesn't.
There's no relation?
No relation to the Authy API. My demo application that you got to play with was using the Verify API. Because Verify API can be used to send those notifications out over a bunch of ways. SMS, we just added WhatsApp as a channel for that. And we have a bunch of other things like you can build it into your own app. But the sort of vanilla Verify API doesn't work with that. But I have access to a thing that's coming out very soon, which is template messages for this. So whilst currently the Verify API itself doesn't straight support like that kind of @domain hash code thing, I was able to add it myself. So it can be done via the Verify API like that.
Sounds good. Very convenient for folks who are already using the platform. And then I guess this is referring to your little video demo as well. Can you customize the feel of the credentials pop-up? I'm assuming that's the top banner there where it sort of lets you copy a code or something.
Yeah, I think so. And I think the answer to that is a straight no. That's browser credential things should be standard to the browser.
Should look like it's part of the app.
Yeah, right. And the way it pops up there, at least on the Android option there, kind of comes up over the bottom, fades the rest of the browser out, is a good kind of interrupt, but is still clearly the browser. It's the same kind of thing for if you're requesting access to a camera or microphone. You want that to be browser Chrome. You don't want that to be your application Chrome. The worst place we see that is in push notifications on the web, where you would get a load of like pop-ups from the browser, and then browsers got annoyed at that. People got annoyed at browsers for that, and now just websites that are bad at this kind of thing have built their own pop-up, and that looks even worse. And I very much dislike it, and that's been a very much wasted API, that one. But yes, we want it to be the browser. Absolutely. Yeah. No, I've had similar like customer requests before where they're like, can we put our favicon there? Can we have like show that it's from us? But yeah, there's that's not the
we want to trust the browser though. It's all good.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's the formal Q&A. I will just double check on the live stream. Yeah, okay. There's nothing in the chat there that I've missed. This is good. My heartfelt thanks. Thanks for taking us through all of that stuff. Virtual applause from the audience. Thank you so much for taking us through that, and much appreciated. If we get any more questions that come through, I will make sure to call upon you at the end of the session. Otherwise, thank you, and we'll jump to our next speaker. See you later. Thanks very much. So we've got a lightning talk jumping in here by Ashley Davis. He's going to show you real quick on how you can turn any web page into a desktop application in 5 minutes. There he is. Hey, Ashley.
Hey, Gavin. Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's good tonight. That was a really cool talk by Phil. So what have I got to show you? This is a really short demo. So normally I do these excruciatingly long talks. I'm sure you'll remember. But tonight it's just like going to be a few minutes. I just want to show you this really cool, like fun little tool that I found. Is it practical? I don't know. You can decide for yourself. Let me just share my screen. Cool. So I found this tool, NativeFire, a couple of months ago, I think. I can't really remember how I found it, like somewhere online. There's the NPM page, the GitHub page for it there. It's all open source. What this does is it can let you pull down any web page into a desktop application. So it does that by wrapping it in an Electron application, but it's really seamless the way it does it. So it's just a really nice example of kind of some easy to use tech, really. Like, it's just surprising how quick and easy it is to kind of pull any web page down and turn it into something that looks, like it almost could be a native application. So let's just put that side by side with my terminal. I'm going to show you how to use this. So you need Node.js installed, obviously, to be able to do this. I'm running version 16. The instructions are just here. So you have to scroll down a bit, actually, to get the, where is it? The command to install it. It was somewhere here. Not the best documentation. Oh, there it is. That should be a little bit clearer. Now, I've already installed this. So just to show you how to do like a global npm install to get NativeFire into your system. Hopefully this is going to take too long because I've already got it. I was playing around with it earlier. And then their example for this, it doesn't actually work. I don't know why. Like I had to put HTTP in front of this to get that to work. But you can do that easily by just finding the web page that you want to kind of embed, going into the address bar and just copying it from there, right? And then basically use the same thing they say. So NativeFire and then the full URL. And it doesn't take too long. Hopefully it'll be there in a moment. I should have showed you as well, before I do this, there's nothing there. So this is just an empty directory. So the thing that it's going to have in here in a second is basically the web page kind of downloaded and embedded in this Electron application. Now, the first time you do this, it is going to take a while to kind of run that process because it does have to download Electron, which is pretty big. Now, if we look there, we can see that we've got a directory kind of named after the application we've just made. And there's a whole bunch of Electron files in there, but you can run the executable and you'll basically get the WhatsApp web page kind of embedded in a desktop application. And of course, you've got to log in if you want to use it and all that stuff. So one of the benefits of this, and please tell me if anyone else can think of other kind of good reasons to use this, is that actually you can see down here on my taskbar, it actually adds a separate icon for it. So it can make it a little bit easier to kind of, if you've got a web page open that you use kind of like every day, like GitHub or something like that, right? And you just want to have like a separate kind of icon or like kind of window open for it. So it's easy to find that window. This seems like a good way to do that. So that's it. I just wanted to show you NativeFire. Does anyone have a request for a web page they want me to kind of try and use this?
I'd say BrisJS, but we know the result is going to work.
BrisJS, can we do it?
Why not? BrisJS.org.
So just open the web page. It's a bit slow.
Let's meet up. BrisJS.org is probably a little easier to package.
So you copy the URL there. Oh, I better get out of this directory. I don't want to be a subdirectory of that one. We can make our very own BrisJS app.
Definitely on the cards.
That is a long URL, a long title.
Yeah, that's the meetup thing is potentially a bit too heavyweight to do this with, but yeah, absolutely. People can pop in something a bit lightweight. Yeah, that's fantastic. So there you go.
The next thing we need to find is something that can instantly create a mobile app from a web page. So if anyone sees that, let me know.
I assume that being able to target the same sort of platform. I mean, Electron and maybe something like what is it?
Ionic.
Yeah, Ionic, or maybe React Native, or something like that. Could be able to repackage it, send it on your mobile. That would be. You could do that as a service. Install a desktop app in your a mobile app on your device with maybe test flight or something in one go. That could be fun. We've really got a question. Can you target system platforms other than the one you're currently running?
Well, no idea. Shall we have a look at the docs? What did I do with that? Yeah, so I just, if you're interested in this, just have a good read of the docs. It's GitHub NativeFire. It says it works for Mac OS, Windows, and Linux. I don't know whether you can kind of build it for one platform from another platform, though. I wouldn't be surprised if you could, because you probably can't do that for Mac OS, because you can't seem to build for Mac OS on any other platform. But usually when you're trying to kind of build Electron apps for Windows or Linux, you can kind of do it on either. That's what I found anyway. I don't know if they have a command line option that allows you to target it.
Very cool. Any other questions, folks? Phil just said he's so good at accidentally closing browser tabs, having standalone apps for a bunch of things would actually be pretty useful. Yeah, I agree.
I think it has, practical appliance. All right.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks so much, Ashley. And if you've got any further follow-ups or questions, do check that out. And we can always post some more questions to Ashley. Thanks, everyone. Cool. I love a good lightning talk. So yeah, we can introduce our next speaker here. James has decided to give us a talk on high performance MySQL. Are you there? There he is, and there's his share.
Awesome. Thanks very much. Is that
too.
all working?
Thanks so much. Yeah, you are. Absolutely. Take it away.
Good stuff. All right. I've never presented to just a virtual crowd and not been able to see any faces. So this is a bit of a new experience for me. So hopefully it goes well. All right. So a bit of a background for me. So we actually don't use Node.js at FoundU. We use Laravel and MySQL and a kind of classic LAMP stack, and then obviously JavaScript on the front end. So it's a little bit of different tech stack, but I thought this talk would still be applicable to those who are using Node.js. And a lot of these concepts are used across any database system. So they kind of apply quite well, like how indexing works and that sort of thing. So I'll just put through here. So first thing, probably lay the groundwork on is performance and performance issues is often something that creeps up on you. As a startup, especially as a super early stage startup, your concerns is not whether you can scale up to 100,000 concurrent users or anything like that. Your concern is, can we actually solve a problem that people will pay for? And can we rapidly build this software as quick as we can to make sure that our customers are happy and all that sort of thing. So the scaling and all that sort of stuff is a little bit of an afterthought at that point in time. And it's something that creeps up on you when one day things start going wrong, things start breaking, and then you got to jump in and start diagnosing this sort of stuff. So that's when you start to get into the scaling startup problems, which is exactly everything I've just described. You're still scrambling to build product as quickly as possible, and you're still doing everything. But now you've got a couple customers that might be noisy neighbors and they're thrashing the database and other people are getting affected, or you might have really big customers that enter a lot more data than you're expecting and things like that. So these issues can creep up on you. The last type that I'd probably talk about as well is sometimes nothing can change and the customer just uses the system for a long period of time, over several years, and they accumulate a lot of data in a way that you weren't necessarily expecting. So all this stuff can add up to be performance issues, and they're often something that needs to get fixed very quickly because customers having problems or other customers having problems. So it can be pretty stressful to diagnose this stuff as it happens, sort of thing. So how did this look for us? Basically errors, slow queries, and people would just report app performance issues. So we would start to see that you can see the CPU spiking to 100% randomly at different points if something's happening in there and things like that. But how I would see it often, which is very not unsophisticated way of receiving error messages, is basically questions to me saying, is it running slow? Is it our internet slow? Is the customer's internet slow? Or are we running slow? And all that sort of stuff. So obviously we need some better tooling in place for this, but this is definitely one of the ways that I used to hear about these issues. So let's take a step back. We're all human. We're not infallible. It's just part of life that, you know, things are going to break at some point in time, and you don't know everything about databases and how to get the most performance out of them at the start when you're building a startup, sort of thing. So we'll make some mistakes in our database design, and that's okay. Some of them are really hard to unwind, but that's okay. You'll think you know how MySQL will scale and it's going to behave when you hit production with a certain size customer, and you can even try load testing if you want, things like that, but you don't really know how it's going to perform in a production environment, and that's just the nature of it. And it's actually, the other thing to remember always is that it's actually a good thing when you're hitting these bad problems, like with scaling and stuff like that, because it actually means that customers are really trying to use your software, and it doesn't feel like it at the time when it's 3 o'clock in the morning or something and you're dealing with an outage. But it's actually great that people want to use what you've built. So you've got to always remember that and keep that in mind when you're diagnosing this stuff and trying to fix these issues and getting stressed out and annoyed at customers for using software in ways that you weren't expecting and things like that. So what we'll cover in this talk we can't cover everything about databases and optimizing and scaling and all that sort of stuff. So I've picked off a bit. We're really going to zero in on optimization and not necessarily spreading across multiple servers and stuff like that. So we're going to look at optimizing versus scaling, optimizing a query, some tips to do with keeping transactions nice and short and things like that, and what that means for the performance of the system, and then a couple database design tips as well. So optimization versus scaling. So optimizing, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the maximum we can out of a certain size MySQL server, essentially. So, we can always go vertical scaling by adding bigger and bigger database servers, but there's also often a little bit more juice to be squeezed out of the size instance that you're currently paying for. And that's what we're really focusing in on this talk, sort of thing. Sometimes you can just cut the head off a couple of these optimization issues, and you can actually stay with a certain database size for a lot longer than you were expecting. And that can save the business a lot of money, which is really good thing to do, sort of thing. So some ways that we optimize, we're looking to avoid n+1 queries, otherwise known as running a query inside of a for loop. Fast queries, we're looking for quick transactions and making sure that they don't hang while you send an email or something like that. And we're also looking to avoid deadlocks. So this is all the stuff I'm going to cover in the talk. On the scaling side of things, this stuff that we're not covering in this talk, adding read replicas, splitting out databases across clusters, and of course, sharding tables and sharding databases and things like that. We're not going to cover any of that sort of stuff. So example time. So FoundYou itself, we do predominantly a payroll system with a lot of workforce management and onboarding capabilities. So kind of the heart and soul of our system is also a rostering system. So this is a really simplified schema of a roster, and we'll use this to create some contrived scenarios, and we can go ahead and do some optimization together. So we've got multiple employees that can be allocated to a given shift. And there's 5 million shifts in total when I created this test, sort of thing. So we got companies, beneath the company, we have some rosters. Beneath that, we have some shifts, and then an employee links to those shifts via many-to-many. So let's have a look. Requirement 1, grab the shifts that start on a given date. So first off, we're going to have a look at the query. We do a select, and just keep in mind here, we've got SQL_no_cache. That's a really important tip, because sometimes what I used to do in the past is run a select statement and then run it again, and I hadn't changed anything, but it was faster. And I thought that I was just a genius, but it turned out that MySQL is actually smarter than me, and it was just caching the results of the previous query. And so I was actually achieving no performance benefit, but I thought I was. So don't be fooled. You have to set the SQL no cache. Okay, so we're going to have a look at this. So we're basically just grabbing out the ID of the shift and the start time, and then we're only looking on a certain date. And we use the date function to make our life easy. Okay, so we get 5,060 rows back, and it takes 3.21 seconds. That's pretty horrific. So we'll run an explain. So when we run the explain, it tells us, MySQL basically tells us what the plan is for that query and what's going to happen. So it says, okay, select type is simple, and I honestly have to always consult the docs on all the different options for the explain outputs. So I won't try and do this all from memory, but there's things like using primary key, there's things like using indexes, using temporary tables, things like that. So in this case, simple, which basically means it's going to do a table scan. And then the other really important key over here is the rows one. And that tells you how many rows it had to loop through to fulfill the query, basically, to tell you what's in and what's out, sort of thing. So in that case, it's looping over 4.94 million records to go ahead and pull out these 5,000 records. It's pretty terrible. So that's 3.21 seconds. So what we'll do is we'll add an index. Okay, so we're going to add our new index. We'll call it the creative name of start IDX, and we'll set it against the start time. Now, we have improved things here. So we rerun the exact same query again, but now we've got an index on the start time, and we've dropped it from 3.21 seconds to 0.89. So things are improving. We're getting back, obviously, the same amount of records because the query hasn't changed, but that's pretty terrible. It should be a lot faster than that. And the culprit here is actually this date function. See, MySQL, when you actually run a function like that, it can't optimize that. It can't fully use the index for that. So instead, what it has to do is basically do that maths in real time, but it'll be doing it against the index, and it's not very quick. So instead, we can swap this out, and we can basically do a between, where we go between the start of the day and between the end of the day. And then we get down to 0 seconds to return those 5,000 rows. This is great. We're moving along. Life's pretty good. And then the next business requirement comes in. Awesome. Grab the shifts end time as well. Okay, awesome. Well, this should be using the index. So all I've done here is added an extra select. And so we're going to grab the end time as well, and same query parameters, but it's added an extra 140 milliseconds, which is pretty interesting. It's not like it is, I suppose, giving back double the data, but why would it take an extra 140 milliseconds? That is interesting. The answer to that is actually how InnoDB indexes work. And once you start to understand this concept, everything else starts to make a lot more sense. And when you're going through the MySQL optimization process and you're optimizing a query, you'll understand the explain output a lot more. So there's actually 3 layers to the way that data is stored in MySQL. I probably got that wrong. It's probably 10, but for the sake of this talk, there's only 3. First, we've got the secondary indexes, which are the indexes that we create, things like that start time index and stuff like that. And then there's the primary index, which is the primary key index. So that's, often an auto incrementing key, or it'll be some sort of GUID or whatever you desire. And then there's the data blocks. And the data blocks is actually where MySQL needs to go to get the data out. So when we do the previous query, so just need to refresh my memory, we're grabbing the start time, the end time, and that's it, right? So when we do that, it can basically use the secondary index to fulfill, or the secondary index and the primary index to fulfill the first query, which was selecting the start time and the ID, and that's it. But to go ahead and get the end time as well, MySQL has to go one layer deeper into the data blocks, and it has to go through and go and pull the end time out of all that. So that's a pretty interesting side effect. So what are our options in this case? We got the start time, we got the end time, and we really do, what can we do to make this faster? Essentially, we can just cop the 140 milliseconds, which is not terrible, and then we don't bloat our index size, or we can add the end time to the index. And when we add the end time to the index as well, suddenly the query speed increases again, and we're back to 0 seconds. And that is because it can pull all the data it needs to fulfill a query out of the first 2 layers of indexing, which is super fast. So that's kind of the point that we hit, the limit that we hit, and we need to start to decide what's best for the way that we build the product, sort of thing. By adding the end time to the index, you're actually making the index longer, which can actually cause other issues. But if you really need that query to be as quick as humanly possible, then that's potentially an option for you. So requirement 3, now I want to search on the end time, right? So I only, in this case, we've changed it to switch from the start time of the shift, and we're only searching on the end time. And then the query jumps up again, not quite back to the 3.2, but it's still higher than what it was. So this is pretty interesting. What is happening here is the order of the indexes actually matter. So the start and end time are both in the index at this point, but the start time's first and the end time's second. And the way that an index is actually stored is basically a string concatenated together in the order of the columns that you select. So the order of those columns is actually really important. You might think it's just like, oh yeah, I'll grab a start time, I need the end time, I need the status, something like that. That's good enough. All right, create my index. But if you're only going to search off the end time or something like that, then you should put that index higher, or that column, sorry, higher in the index, so it's first, because then there's a higher chance that will get used more frequently. So it's a pretty interesting case, and what this all comes back to is really understanding the read patterns on your data. I'll cover that a little bit more. So essentially now we'll run some more tests. Does the join matter? Does the join order? I ran through a whole bunch of different tests here. So does the join order matter? No. Does the where order matter? No. You know, like there's a whole bunch of optimizations that MySQL do for you that makes your query faster, and it will work out the best query plan for you. And then you're kind of left with whatever MySQL picks. So in this case, we can have a look at this. If we were to diagnose this query, we would say that basically this 1, 2, 3, 5 is where it has to do the most work in the join, but that's not too bad, looping over 1,200 records essentially. So let's add another index. So in this case, yep, we're adding a new one, and we're grabbing the roster ID and the start time, and we're going to speed that up. So that was the solution. Sorry, I've jumbled my slides a little bit. I apologize. So what are some downsides of indexes? We've had a look at the power of them. We've had a look at how to speed queries up with them. So indexes can grow very large over time. And every time you add more indexes, or you have a lot of indexes on a column, every time you write data to that table, it's going to have to write an update and rebalance all of those indexes. So you're asking MySQL to do a lot more work when you have a table that's chock full of indexes versus one that has none. So my recommendation for that reason is actually to start with no indexes and try not to index the table initially, and then wait until a point where you know the read pattern on that table and you know how you're going to query it, and you know what the most commonly queried columns are, like what the cardinality of them or the uniqueness of those columns will be. And then I would start to build up the indexes there. A huge anti-pattern that I've seen over the years is basically picking off all the columns that you think someone might want to search on and just creating an index on every single one, just single level index. I don't recommend that unless you really have no idea what the read pattern is on that table. If you do know what the read pattern is on that table, then you can just add the indexes that only make sense and ignore the other columns that people aren't going to search on. And I say read patterns, but I should also talk about write patterns in a little bit as well. So the other thing to note too is that when your primary key is actually stored with the index. So if you write a query where you select back all of the IDs for something and you pull that data back, and then you go and stuff that into another query, or you return just the IDs out, it's really important in your select statement to only grab the ID and only grab the data that you need, because if the data only exists in the index and the primary key, that can speed up your results a lot. So that's a little like bit of performance for free. Plus you're saving all that transport between your application and the database as well. So some key takeaways, just to drive a few things home. It's far easier to add an index and remove it. As far as I'm aware, there's actually no way to check and ask MySQL, hey, when was the last time that you used this index, or anything like that. And without that ability, you can never know that you can remove an index, because it might be actually helping out your queries and you're not aware of it. So once an index is created and it's in production, it's a pretty scary proposition to just go and delete that one day and then see if the performance degrades in your system. It's not a very good way of approaching things. So unless you run explain on every single query that's trying to hit that table, it's a bit of a funny position. So don't add them. Be careful when you're adding indexes. And then the other thing I'd say is sometimes another trick that I can use is adding more filters can give MySQL more ability to use different indexes than you're expecting, sort of thing. So you'll often see this with a lot of joins in a query. So you'll see a query, lots of joins, and then you might have the ability to sort of add extra wheres to the join tables, even if they feel a bit redundant. That can actually help MySQL cut down the sizes of the joins and all that sort of stuff and improve the performance as well. So the last point that I drive home is that MySQL decides what it wants to do, and you can override MySQL and you can say, hey, please use this index for this query. But often if you're in that situation where you're suggesting to MySQL which index it should use, something's gone wrong with how you've indexed that table, sort of thing. You should take a step back and potentially look at stripping away all the indexes and starting fresh. And you should also start to look into how MySQL is deciding which index it should use, sort of thing. So it's pretty annoying when it uses an index you're not expecting, when it could use a better one. It's really tough situation. The other thing too, if the table size is too small, or your where filter grabs too large a chunk of the table, it will just completely ignore all indexes and it will always just do a table scan, because it might as well. It has to loop through all the data blocks anyway to go and pull all this data out. So I'll just do a table scan from the start, sort of thing. So you often see that with date filters, but we see it with date filters, where if you're grabbing a week's worth of data, it uses all of the indexes to its full power. And then you grab 3 months worth of data and it does a full table scan and throws its cards up in the air and you go, oh, okay, I don't know how to solve this, sort of thing. So that could be a really tricky situation as well when MySQL opts for a full table scan on a really big table. Yeah, cool. So now let's have a chat about transactions and deadlocks. So transactions and deadlocks kind of go hand in hand. So they're something we don't really think about that much as developers, but they're actually one of the most important features inside of MySQL and any sort of database, is the ability to cleanly transact a change, and you don't get any sort of situation where some of the data that you wrote to the database saved, some didn't. Yeah, that's essentially what they're covering up for you. So behind the scenes, MySQL is actually using transactions to do any update and any delete on anything. So whenever data is changing within the database, it's actually using a transaction. And that can lead to really funny situations where you haven't programmed a transaction in your code, but you run into a transaction deadlock or something like that. And you go, there's no transaction there. Why is this thing deadlocking or timing out? Like, this is really weird, sort of thing. So yeah, it's a pretty interesting situation. So how do they occur? There's basically two types. The lock timeouts is pretty simple. A transaction's held on too long. So you might have opened a transaction, created the employee's profile or something like that, and sent a welcome email. And then the welcome email, timed out because that other server was taking too long. And then, like, essentially that's it. It just held the transaction too long. And then the MySQL eventually says, nope, you're not talking to me. I'm going to shut this transaction down and I'm going to roll it back to the previous state. The other thing that we look at is actually deadlocks. These are a little bit trickier. So this is actually two transactions that are competing for changes that simply cannot coexist together. So MySQL is pretty good at balancing and avoiding deadlocks. So especially the InnoDB engine. So heaps of updates can go through on a table and life's pretty good. But you can see by these two transactions starting here. So we start a transaction, we basically update the stock price in one particular order on one date. And then in another transaction, we go and update it on a different date, like with the same dates, but in reverse. MySQL can't do that. It can't fulfill one transactions request and fulfill the other transaction request. It's simply impossible. So it goes, no, I'm not going to do any of this stuff. I'm going to deadlock, and it throws an error. And then you're left to clean it up on the application side. So you'll often not see deadlocks super frequently unless you are writing software that has a lot of transactions in it. I tend to only push for transactions when it's something that's quite business critical, because I do find that they can lead to deadlocks very easily, especially if you have any sort of slowdowns and stuff like that. So just a word of warning there. Excuse me. Transaction tips. So first thing we want to do is keep the transactions as fast as possible. And the other thing we can do is actually run an explain on our updates and deletes. And I don't think you do an explain on insert, but maybe you can. And have a look at the query plan for those updates and deletes. And then what you can do is actually do the same thing as diagnosing a slow select. you can also diagnose a slow update command sort of thing, because that is often a source of deadlocks and transaction issues. So updates need to be fast sort of thing. So potentially you just need to look at your indexing. The other thing too is not super common these days, but I feel it is worth mentioning. Don't mix the storage engines and transactions. In MySQL these days, nearly everything's in ODB, and there's very, very, very few reasons to look at any other engine aside from InnoDB. It's just so good. But potentially you've got some old ISM tables, whatever they were. Potentially you've got some logging tables or something like that. You can't mix the transactions in those storage engines. Okay, keeping your database lean. So just a few quick tips here. Smaller fields are typically better, but I wouldn't, like, you can go overboard, but I wouldn't go too overboard. I would also consider moving text fields to something else. So potentially the text fields are something that is, depending on the write patterns and depending on the read patterns, could be better stored in AWS S3 or something else, potentially some sort of KV storage that can handle a document store. And then you can also move out the optional data into subtables and kind of maybe over normalize those tables. So have some key value tables or something like that, some long tables, but thinner tables to store any excess data. And what that can do is shrink the overall table size and make the queries a little bit faster. The other thing that you can use, just a technique, is sometimes if you have, say, a JSON blob and you want to, there might be a chance that it's repeating through your database. Instead of just storing it as several versions of the same data blob, what you can do is checksum that. So use an MD5 or something like that and grab a fingerprint on that particular JSON blob. And then you can store that as the key and reference that instead in your other table or something like that. So it's a way of basically saying, is this unique, by checksumming it and then putting the JSON, the full data in there, and then you're kind of reducing the amount of redundancy you have there. Sort of just a small tip. It's very specific to certain circumstances, but just something to think about. Unsign your integer fields is a really easy one, unless you have negative numbers, like, or just always unsign them, always, especially primary keys and stuff like that. And the other thing you can do is consider storing dollars as cents or 4 decimal places, like decide on something consistent and do that. And then keep the maximum joins under 15. Like, I'd say you'd have a pretty gnarly query if you had over 15 joins, but I'm sure it's happened. I'm sure people have seen it here. If you have flat reporting tables, we basically want to limit how many hops, like how many other tables we need to join to. So we kind of have a rule that we shoot for, if we have a reporting table and we need to join out to get some display information, say a name or something like that, we want 1 join from the reporting table, always, only a maximum of 1 join. We don't want to have to join to something else to get some display information. That can really speed up a lot of queries and stuff as well, but can be a bit of a premature optimization as well. N+1 queries, I really need to talk about this one because it's something that's really easy to do, particularly in Laravel and with Laravel's models and Eloquent. But I'm not sure what the leading ORM is in the node world, but I'm sure it's possible to accidentally do a query in a loop by doing lazy loading rather than eager loading or something like that. So they're really hard to spot in production because they don't show in our slow query logs, and they're kind of silent, right? Like, you don't necessarily want to log every single query. So what we do at FoundYou is we have a middleware that runs only on developers' machines, and it basically grabs all the query log while you're running each particular route, and it goes ahead and looks at any of the same query that happens more than 3 times. And we're also looking at any query that takes longer than 50 milliseconds or something like that. But that's a slow query, and then obviously a repeating query sort of thing, so an N+1 query. And then we go and look at the source of those. So if you have a, say, for example, an API response, and that response gives out 20 results, and then you see a query that runs 20 times, there's a pretty good chance that you've looped over something in the responses and you've done a query per time, and potentially you can optimize that. So it's something you can do, but they are tricky to spot. and they often like sneak up on you in a way that is very frustrating. So some packages can highlight them. In Laravel land, we've got debug bar and things like that. And then potentially you could look at creating a wrapper around your database connector to create your own query logger if that's what you need to do, sort of thing. So just laying out the basic plan of attack without reaching straight for New Relic right out of the gate. So what are some options that you have before you go and spend a whole bunch of money on some sort of APM module? So first thing I would do if I was coming into a brand new project that was, needed to get optimized, first thing I'd look at is the slow query log, and I'd turn it on in production, and then I would check that every single day. It's really easy to do inside of AWS RDS, and I'm sure it's easy to do in the other cloud providers. So make that discipline of just checking it every single day, and then go and look at the source of those queries, like where did it come from, like what's it doing, what route is it, and all that sort of stuff is really helpful. Next thing that I would do is set CPU alarms. So basically when it hits, work out whatever the peak load is. So you'll often see like the CPU load will go, say, for your system up to 40% or up to 80% or something like that. And it'll do it on Mondays at 2 p.m. or something like that. You can set an alarm that's below that threshold, and when it fires, you can go ahead and go straight into the system at the time and run a process list. And you can look at what's happening and you can see it. Often you'll spot, when I run the show process list, I can spot the N+1 queries because I'll see them. They're just constantly there, and they're not going away anytime soon. It's very unusual. And the other thing you'll see is any sort of slow queries, anything like that. And you can see why it's locking up as well in that response. So it's not exactly the most scientific way of going about it, but it's extremely effective, especially when you're dealing with a performance issue that's happening right now. So the other thing I would say is that query logging middleware that I suggested earlier. And then you can also look at the sizes of your tables in production, not on your local machine, in production. What are the big tables? What are the big databases? If you have database per customer, why is it so big? Just start to ask those questions and look into that. With Queryus or I don't know, whatever, MySQL Workbench, all that sort of stuff, they'll all have the ability to show you the database size, table size, things like that. And then from there, you can start to diagnose like where things might be a bit wrong, sort of thing. Finally, you can look at APM tools, which are very expensive, but often worth it. So you can look at New Relic. I think SolarWinds has one, if you trust them, and things like that. So I'm pretty sure there's some open source ones as well. Some references, and yeah, that's basically it. I think I see some questions coming through.
Hey mate, yeah, absolutely. We've got a 4 question set here, I think, so far, but yeah, we've had a couple on the live stream, so I will move them through. I've already caught a couple that have come in through from YouTube, so let's get cracking into it. Thank you, by the way. That was a great deep dive, and I think there's a bunch of really useful tips there as well. Because yeah, sometimes, especially if you're kind of coming from the front end world, you're trying to be a full stack person, and the whole DB side of it can absolutely overwhelm you, I think.
Yeah,
so that's
exactly right. And the other thing too, like even if you start as a back-end developer, you are not exposed to this stuff as a junior. You might not even be exposed to production as an intermediate, and sometimes even seniors aren't exposed to production. So this stuff can just, one day you're in charge and you got to figure it out, sort of thing, and no one's telling you how to do it. So it can be pretty stressful for sure.
Absolutely. The one day you're in charge is a very familiar pattern, isn't it? Yeah. So we've got a couple in here. I'll start from the earliest one that we've got in here. Did you find any tools that might suggest indexes based on a given query?
I haven't, and that's because I find the output of explain tells you a lot of information, so you can look at why it's not using an index or that sort of stuff. So I'd start with explain first and do a deep dive on that. if you've gotten far enough to identify that this query is a bad query, then the explain output will really send you in the right direction. It's hard to read, and you have to consult the docs, but it'll take you to the next level. And if you are still stuck at that point, you can always hit me up directly via LinkedIn, probably the most responsive, and I'll jump on a call with you happily through the workday and have a chat, and we can talk about how to optimize that query.
Amazing. That sounds cool. We'll have to have you back on to understand some of the most interesting requests and suggestions that you've seen coming through.
Yeah.
One of the next ones that's here is I thought maybe I accidentally closed the wrong one here. Hang on a minute. I'll ask the next one. Did tweaking your queries require you to move away from default Eloquent constructions and use DB queries?
That's a really good question. Yes and no. So the way I would put it essentially is Eloquent has amazing features. Like it simplifies a whole bunch of just a normal day-to-day database manipulation and reading and all that sort of stuff. So Eloquent certainly has its place, but I would never be afraid of dropping back to raw SQL. And I find that often people who only use ORMs or only use an abstraction layer, they struggle to go back to just raw SQL because they think it looks messy in the code and things like that. But I would not be afraid of doing that ever, because I think a well created or well crafted statement inside of just SQL will actually be a lot less tech debt than having an ORM that you're doing all these sort of weird hacks to try and get it to create the query that you want it to do, sort of thing. So some examples of that, like you'll see Eloquent will do some odd things where it comes to like where has. So when you're querying on a relationship, it'll do a very inefficient query pattern and stuff like that, where a join is actually much faster. So absolutely, I find that probably, I don't know what percentage, maybe 80 or 90% of the slow queries we get would be because of Eloquent. And it's not like I want to throw Eloquent in the bin, but you just got to pick the right tool for that right purpose.
Yeah, absolutely. Go and give it a review after you've gone through and created some items and see.
We can open a pull request if you want to.
Absolutely. Sorry, let me start again. Are there good patterns to negatively expand on a database to try and show up some of these problems? So right. I guess grabbing your existing database structure and stressing it in different directions.
Right. Okay. Yep. And try to show up some of these problems. Okay. Yeah. So you can certainly do stress testing. Some other things that I would consider, that we don't actually do this at FoundYou, but something that I've looked at starting to implement is potentially just filling a database with 10 million records or something like that in a particular table, and then seeing how the rest of the system performs. And that can expose a lot of issues before your customer get it. Where we are in our life cycle, like that's a pretty rare situation for a customer suddenly to have 10 million records. So the performance issues creep up on us, which is very different. But if I was working for a much bigger place where you were essentially presented with just like a wall of traffic on every single release, that's something that I would probably consider doing as an anti-risk sort of way of de-risking that release sort of thing. So you could fill out the database. You can also put the system into a strain, so there's plenty of stuff to test out, concurrent requests and throughput and all that sort of stuff, and have a whole bunch of noise and traffic against your testing environment. But I haven't gone down that path yet. I haven't needed to. It's just the way that our system works. It's not generally necessary, but you certainly could look at that.
Yeah, awesome. I guess related to that is then the last question we've got here is, when moving to the cloud with auto scaling features, do you need to modify your optimization tips to catch anything new?
So we were in the cloud already. So I guess it's a great question. One of the things I think that's pretty interesting, so we're now for full disclosure, we're inside of AWS RDS, and we use the Aurora database engine, which gives you read-write replicas out of the bucket, out of the gate, and it gives you a whole bunch of performance stuff, which is really quite helpful. We still get choppy CPU from inefficient things. So we'll see some cron job, or just our usage pattern is, super high traffic from 8 a.m. till 12 p.m. on Monday morning when everyone's doing all their work for the week, and then lower traffic for the rest of the week. So that stuff, it's not necessarily tied to whether you're on-prem or in the cloud. You still don't really want to pay for a massively high instance just because you're in the cloud and you can, sort of thing. So whenever we bump up the size of an instance, it's not a big deal, but it is a pretty big deal for the amount that we pay for RDS. So we try and look at what our other options are first to try and get as much as we can out of it, sort of thing. So yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. That's cool. Good advice, I think, generally. Awesome stuff. Well, thanks so much for all that. That's going to help out a ton of people, I'm sure. And I think we'll definitely, like I said, I have to have you on again to see what comes out as some of the most common things that you've picked up.
That's good. I've probably written half of them, so yeah, happily share. Thanks very much for having me, Kevin. I appreciate it.
No, it's a great appreciation from everyone here, and our audience is definitely going to have to get in touch, and thank you as well. So thanks very much.
Fantastic. Thanks, Kevin.
See you next time. All right. And that brings us to our last speaker of today, but by no means least. We've got Andre to present his talk that he is actually, unfortunately, ill to present last time round. So for those who have been hanging with bated breath, wait no more. Here it is. We've got Andre to present to you today. You there, Andre?
Absolutely.
We can hear you, but we can't see you.
I'm just sharing my screen. So give me a minute. And in the usual Zoom fashion, sorry, I'm just going to stop sharing the screen. I'll share my camera because that's what you have to do. Hey guys.
Hi.
You can see me now?
Can, indeed.
All right. So actually, I don't know if you're a super genius, Kevin, but this talk will actually talk to the other two talks that we've had today, which is emerging standards and actually how to optimize and actually observe systems. So OpenTelemetry simulators with Node.js. So let's go through a quick schedule. I'll talk about flood map for a little bit, and then I'll talk about observability, OpenTelemetry, my project. Then I'll kind of walk you through the Node.js implementation of what I think is the ultimate observability project. Well, not the ultimate, but close to it. It should answer a lot of questions. And then what I've learned. So we'll do a flood map. Flood map is a startup I started with this year. Essentially, it is the ability to give emergency services and other providers the ability to understand when a flood happens, how it affects people. And those of us in Brisbane, New South Wales will closely relate to this. How we do it is we take a bunch of data. It's environmental data, it's geographic data. And then we have models, which the team at FlightMap has developed over the last 3 years. And what we get are geographic projections like this. So basically, on the map, we know where the flood extents will go. The kind of things we do is something called forecasts. So we try to predict where floods will go, road safe. So that's basically trying to figure out if there is a high flooding area, what shows will be closed. Nowcast is what's happening right now, and postcast is what's happening afterwards. Just some examples of recent work we've done with federal and state governments. This was a couple of floods, so this is validation data. This is what our model thought it was going to be. And these are photos of what actually happened, so they're pretty accurate. Another example of a recent event where these are photos of what actually happened, and these are models. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is observability versus monitoring, and I'm not disagreeing or agreeing with other people's approaches here, but for me, observability is the way forward. And the difference between observability and monitoring is essentially observability is about observing a system. You don't query the system for things you want to know about the system. The system tells you about itself. In order for the system to tell you about itself, it has to describe three main things. And natively, we know these things. It's metrics, logging, and tracing. Of these three things, tracing is probably the least native to most people. And what a trace is a bunch of information collected together about the calls that we make, whether it's a MySQL database or anything else, all the calls we make to make something happen. And tracing in itself is a very powerful tool, but it's not as powerful as any of the other ones. All these tools used together is what gives us observability. So if you believe in the concept of observability, then you have to kind of go, well, how do we go about implementing this? The current model is what we call a super collection. So basically you choose a file log aggregator, something like Fluentbit, you choose a tracing library, you choose a metric library, and you kind of get all this stuff together somehow, but it never makes sense. The OpenTelemetry model on the right kind of says, well, I understand the concept of observability, and I'm going to combine all of this into a single thing. And I'm going to allow you to collect all the data from your application and export it into something that makes sense. OpenTelemetry as a project is actually what I would like to say are 5 key components. Specification, which we'll touch on in this talk. The language SDKs, which we'll touch on in this talk. We will not talk about auto instrumentation collector or vendor ecosystem, but if you're interested in those sort of things, go and have a look at them. So OpenTelemetry, much more than just a specification, it is a collection of ideas and then implementations and kind of building on them. This one can be quite hard to understand. So basically, OpenTelemetry kind of says what we want are signals, and signals are logs, traces, and metrics. If we have those signals and we code them in a standardized way, what we can do is actually then just change things, and we can export them to different places. We can collect them in different ways, and we can have this whole ecosystem of building telemetry together. One of the key things that really got me at first with using OpenTelemetry was the difference between API and SDK. All the examples I'll be showing you today will be the SDK, because what I'm trying to do is kind of show you how I build a CLI tool to really rapidly adopt this and really being able to try this out in real time with Node.js without having to worry about all the intricacies. So in December 2020, I had a bit of downtime. I had 2-3 weeks of downtime. And before that, I was working on a project where I was trying to present a unified observability layer. However, this unified observability layer required me to use Prometheus for metrics, Zipkin for traces, and Loki for logs, which also at the same time had to force me to use multiple domain-specific languages for DSLs. For those of you who don't know what it means. So basically, to get the outcome I wanted, I had to write a bunch of different queries, a bunch of different languages, and I had to mash them together, some Grafana, which is quite a useful tool. Over the Christmas holidays, I had this flash moment. I said, well, why not put all this stuff in a time series database, which is basically designed for high ingest, high volume data. I mean, QuestDB claims 5 million records a second. Why not just generate all this kind of telemetries and just put them straight into this high effective database, which has all this kind of like time scaling and everything else. So one of the things you can do with QuestDB is you can tell it basically separate everything by folder. So if you're looking for a specific time range, it will only look in 2 of the 140 folders that it wants to do. And then in Grafana, I just run a bunch of SQL queries. I could cross-correlate And unlike the previous model, where I had to learn all these DSLs, I could use one language. Unfortunately, my project didn't work. And at the time, I was using Python, and it was just a bunch of things that just didn't work. And I spent a lot of time trying to just get data into something, into QuestDB. And that's where Node.js comes to rescue. So then I kind of started thinking, well, if I was going to build a shopping cart and I had carte blanche for some kind of service, how would I build a shopping cart that would just be stick to the microservice pattern? That's what I can come up with. So now let's have a look at some code. So the first code I want to talk about is basically using the Node.js libraries, the Node.js implementation libraries, to do something. And what I was trying to trying to get here was write code that's not just a bunch of GitHub stuff mashed together. Understand each bit, annotate each bit, and actually go something. All right, so let's walk through a code. I'm assuming people can see it. So basically, there's some cool components you need to import to set up a tracer signal. And the signal, for those of you who missed it, is basically a telemetry. It's either a log, it's either a metric, or it's a trace. So in this case, it's a trace. So I was just being asked to zoom in. Okay, so a tracer signal, right? Annotations, basically it is OpenTelemetry defines something called annotations or semantic conventions. Basically, it says, tell me what is generating this data. Exporters, those of you who are not familiar with it. So for example, if you want to export to something like Zinkin or Jaeger or something else, you actually have to use those libraries generally. You have to conform to those patterns. One thing that OpenTelemetry does is it allows you to collect data in a single way and export in different ways. So I'll show you that in a minute. Faker, it just basically just generates some faking data. And then we just kind of go through initializing the providers, and then we set some standards. We add span processes. I'm not going to go too much into span processes. Basically, what it means is that all of these guys are going to be fed this information. So utility function to basically just generate some errors. Once again, we're not going to get too much into semantic conventions, but basically, each service should generate some errors. Simulating a shopping cart. So basically, each part of a shopping cart, I think I showed you the shopping cart here. So basically, each of these services will generate some random errors for the traces. The reason why I like that is I want to see how different things respond. And then basically we have parent span, and then we have the ability to go. So let's go run some code and basically so what this code will do is it will just spit out some general things. And the way we're going to explore this, which makes the most sense, is we're going to actually look at a couple of tools that are very common in my part of the world, which is, sorry, where's it hide? There we go. So there's a couple of tools that are very common in my part of the world, which is Jaeger, which is used to kind of analyze traces. You can see that this particular simulation is actually generating lots and lots of different spans. You can see some of them have 5, some of them have 7. So this means the 5 and the 7s are basically that some of them fail and some of them not. Some of the other things we can have a look at, which is pretty cool from a Jaeger point of view, we have events, we have logs. But let's just say your team uses Zipkin and you guys don't want to run a Zipkin export. With the same code, nonetheless, what we can do is we can actually go and run the same thing. And it's just the same information represented in a different way. So one of the cool things about OpenTelemetry is that you can actually have different tools that consume the same information and they just represent in different ways. And you can see all that. Right, that's enough with traces. And traces are probably, of all the things I could talk about for hours, traces are probably the hardest things in the world, because traces allow us to troubleshoot things in a more fundamental way. It's like, where is the slowdown? Is it in the database queries? Is it in the interfaces that we've done? Is it actually in other things? All right. Let's talk about metrics. So the other thing I really wanted to do with this code was use the same patterns. And you will see that I've actually used exactly the same pattern. So we find core components, we import in the same attributes, we use in different exporters. And for the sake of this demonstration, I'll use the Prometheus exporter. So any of you guys who are familiar with Prometheus will know it's quite a common thing. So this code is not Prometheus code. This code is OpenTelemetry code. So this has nothing to do with Prometheus. However, if we run this code and we refresh, we get Prometheus-like statistics. So that's pretty cool. So without doing much work at all, we are still using the OpenTelemetry libraries. There is no mention here of any Prometheus libraries. We're still using OpenTelemetry libraries. Here we're getting Prometheus-like things getting exported. And if we actually go to my local Prometheus and we choose one of the metrics that we chose to export, we will see that there's all our telemetry. We did not have to write Prometheus specific code to get this. And this is the power of exporters. The last thing I want to talk about is potentially, this is why I love OpenTelemetry, because the specifications are very clear and what you need to implement, what don't you need to implement. So in the weekend, I kind of had a go at implementing this, which was a log specification. And this is the kind of stuff that I'm going to do. I'm going to walk you through the code. It is not by any means of the stretch the best Node.js sample code, but it will show you some of the power of this particular concept. So we import a couple of libraries because I actually don't know how to convert to nanoseconds in Node.js. I still use that resource. We still use the semantic attributes and we just use Falcon. The only thing we have to add is a couple of basically interpretations of the specification. And going down, what we'll get is, if we actually run, we actually will get logs that will look very, very similar in a minute. We'll get logs that look very, very similar to the specification. And I'm sure if we pass those logs through, they'll be quite cool. They will actually be kosher. So, lesson learned. OpenTelemetry, unlike other providers, it does take you time to actually figure out what those semantic attributes that we want, etc., etc. But it's so worth it because the ability to send to multiple vendors to change vendors, to export to different vendors, I think it's worth it. It's a bit more complex than just doing the init vendor A, B, C, put an API key, but I think it's worth it. It's a jungle out there. Like I spent a bit of time in terms of like just writing a fully implemented metric log and trace thing, like just basically all the things you should include because they're just cool. Like not just cool, but just important. Like how just one-liners, like literally, I want to generate a bunch of spans and I want to see if my new tool deals with those spans. So, and also core libraries evolve and stuff like that. So like writing that kind of thing, which just says, I'm going to generate spans, which I know what those spans are. I know what the physical controls of those spans are because I've controlled them myself. And I want to see how the vendor that I'm sending those spans to reacts to those. I of all the things I actually really loved, of all the languages I could have done this in, I love exploring this in Node.js because the library is so well written and it was amazing. Like I really enjoyed kind of like reconciling the Node.js implementation to the standard and understanding it. So it helped me be a better OpenTelemetry person, but also helped me be able to understand how it works. And last but not least is, this is my project now. So I will use my Node.js simulators. I'll use the OpenTelemetry collector to put things in Quest to be, and I will hopefully be able to demo a different version of what I was trying to achieve. And that's me.
Fantastic. Sorry, I was a bit slow on the mute button there, unmute button. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for taking us through that. We did get in some few questions here through, especially through the end.
Just give me a minute. Sorry. Do you know how?
No worries.
Do you know how to stop sharing? Oh, right.
Yep, you get to move to the Zoom window, and then it will be on one of the shared windows.
I always have this problem. I have the view button.
I can always give you a hand remote.
Oh, no, there we go. Yeah, sorry.
Got it. No worries.
So I always delete the, because I always use the top, so I always hide it. So I always use the tabs. Anyway, yeah.
All good.
First world
no worries.
Guys got a few ideas, but
no problem at all, mate. Yeah, we got some questions in here. I think you've definitely inspired some folks to start looking at this, because there's obviously a bunch of different systems and pieces of data that everyone wants to kind of tie together. So yeah, I can definitely see the huge benefits in this SRE kind of space as well. One of the first questions here is, if you wanted to then relate all the different tooling data into one view, how do you approach pulling all the parts of OpenTelemetry spec together?
OpenTelemetry, see, the thing is, like, to do the full talk about it, it'll be about 30 minutes. So there's a bunch of things, like, I touched on 2 of the 5 components that actually make the spec, and one of them is the collector. So basically, what you would do is you would unify your data into OTLP, which is basically a prototype buffer, protobuf sort of thing. But you will send it to a collector, and then your collector will kind of just translate it. And it's got 40 at the moment. Like, you can send it to Sumo Logic, it can send it to Splunk, anywhere you want to do. So basically, you would use that pattern. So you would basically, the thing I was trying to say is, like, what if you invest in writing your code, writing your telemetries into this, then you're future-proof, because you can, like as I showed you, with one line, I was exporting to 2 different trace providers. I was exporting to Prometheus. You can do whatever you want, right? So, but the beauty of it is it's like a one-line change. So to answer the question, is basically you would use the OpenTelemetry collector to aggregate the data in AWS, Azure, Google, everybody has their own version of it that will ingest the native protobuf protocol and will transfer it to their own. So you are not lost there. So like it's like a smoker's board. It's like you write your code, you write your telemetry once, and you just have this choice of how you
and pull it together. Yeah. So that I think that kind of answers one of the other questions on here is how can we get standard app logs to become OpenTelemetry compatible? Would this really be a transportable benefit, or is it better to send to a consumer? So what you've just highlighted is there's a consumer there that can help, but you'd be writing to this protobuffer format instead.
Oh yeah, so the logs, that's quite the OpenTelemetry came out of two projects, right? It's OpenCensus and OpenTracing, right? Tracing for a long time, that's why I kind of highlighted it was the hardest, but if I had to troubleshoot a problem, right, and I had metrics or logs, I would take tracing any day. Like literally, the reason why is because it's sorry, forgive the dog. So if I had to troubleshoot any day, I would take tracing any day because it is the journey with specific intents. Metrics will give you alarms, and the first thing any good DevOps or any kind of engineer does is they look at logs and then kind of go, "What are you doing?" Tracing gives you that context, so that's why OpenTracing and OpenCensus combine initially to do OpenTelemetry. But if it, like everything on fire, I would take traces because it would show me that the database is slowed down, whatever else, and I could fix that. So I think it's just my first slide was monitoring versus observability. I would much rather, if I could have it, I would much rather observe all my systems. I would not want to monitor my systems.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there's one here that asks, I think it's on the same line as the answer that you've provided. What kind of systems do you see as the best benefit to tie together logs into OpenTelemetry? So network and app traffic to trace together, question mark?
No. We're going through an evolution, right? So I'll explain. It's basically traditional monitoring, and I used to sell APM software for a vendor, right? And part of the APM software was like Airflow analysis. And kind of do the Airflow analysis. The new world, as hard as it's defined, the new world is about services. And I don't care about Airflow. What I want to know is my service responding in a time manner, right? So that's my first question. And as long as my service, whether it's my databases, or actually, it's actually just my front-end services, I need to give you this answer back, whether it's a Giphy, it's an emoji, it's your card, whatever else, right? I want to give you that back within 1 second, 99% of the time. That's the first level, right? So you abstract all the monitoring, and this is the whole monitoring versus observability thing. You abstract all the monitoring. You remove every single thing you potentially care about, alarm about. So you have a service, and the service are in control or it's not under control. When a service is not under control, then the only question you ask, how rapidly did this deteriorate? So for example, if we have a 90% availability and the last 30 days a service just dipped like that, I won't do anything. I don't have to. There's lots of alarm, blah, 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 blah. That's traditional monitoring, but our service is still within the context which is designed. Now, our service starts dropping really, really rapidly like that. We're going to breach our service objective. That's when we intervene and we go, what can we use to figure out what this? And that's where observability comes in, because it tells me, we haven't scaled the databases right. And that is what we care about. So it's actually a fundamental change. Like the question is wrong because it is framed in the whole, like, we monitor, we jump on every alarm. But no, we're allowed to have failures because that is the whole, that's why Google runs it. And then we have the failure rate. The only thing that will cause a failure rate is either a spike in traffic or a bad deployment. And the earlier you catch it, and that's where observability comes in. Observability allows us to go, right, that's the guy. So that's the difference. Like fundamentally, you have to shift your ideas to go to get the benefits of this. You really have to have the benefits of that. You have to think about it that way. And yeah, you can't use, I don't think you can use OpenTelemetry. It's like any other observability system. Like if you're going to use it to be jump out squad on every alarm and whatever else, the only value it will ever add to you will be that it just simplifies the number of places you have to send it to. But if you actually subscribe to the whole, the reason why observability exists is to enforce SLA. It's much more powerful.
Awesome. That's great. I think that gives everyone a good context as well. All right, cool. Thank you so much. We've gone through a lot of ground to cover there, and I think there's a clear room for more OpenTelemetry follow-up, and we'll see how Twitter responds to everyone with more OpenTelemetry content and how we apply that to our JavaScript world. Thanks so much, Andre. I really appreciate you coming on today and giving us the presentation.
Thanks, Kev. Thanks, guys. Bye.
No worries. Oh, good. So what we can do now is bring up our outro slide. If it plays nice, there it goes. All right, everyone. Yes, you've reached that point of the night. You've seen all our wonderful speakers, and hopefully you are very grateful and happy that you've seen all these presentations tonight. I think BrisJS just keeps growing and gets better and better with the different kinds of topics that we've got. As we keep expanding and doing our development in front end and back end, now we have systems tools that we can go and leverage and export to. We've got the browser APIs, we've got mobile device APIs. It's a wild and wacky world out there that we need to keep on top of. So the variety and the journey that we've been through from everyone's talks, I think is really beneficial to everyone. So thank you again. If you wanted to reach out to us, we've got a couple of different contact points. You can reach out there, and I mean, we've got our Slido if you wanted to recap any of the answers that we've been given or any of the questions that have been covered in this talk. We've got that there. We've got brisjs.org linked up, and you can reach us on Twitter. Send a message if you're interested in getting any feedback about any potential talks. But we've also got the GitHub that obviously I'm encouraging everyone to contribute to. If you've got a talk idea, feel free to pop it up there, and you can always banter and get some feedback about whether or not you feel it's any good. And we might be able to reach out and find some other folks, and you can do a bit of a team talk and work together as well if you feel that's a benefit to you as well. So lots of different options to be able to engage with the community. And thanks again for spending this evening with us, for all the folks that joined us live. And if you're watching us on the recording, thank you again, and do check out some of our other talks on the YouTube channel as well. And look forward to seeing you next month. And I appreciate every one of you for engaging with our socials as well. So thanks for keeping us in mind. All right, this is the point where I say goodbye. Thanks everyone, and see you next month.